Hi, I'm James from Future Voices podcast. Today I'm joined by Lisa Bascott, who is the founder of Second Line of Defence and is a non-executive director of the Safer Business Network. We are talking about how we increase safety across all areas of our communities, and I'm really excited that she came to join us. I hope you find it helpful. So welcome, Lisa. Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank you for joining me. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Right. I am Lisa Bascott, and a couple of years ago, I founded a company called Second Line of Defence. And essentially, that was in sort of direct relation to something that happened in my hometown of Clapham, South London, in March 2021. And for most people, they will remember it was the murder of a woman called Sarah Everard. By a police officer called Wayne Couzens. And I say to people all the time that that one event literally changed the course of my life. I mother of two teenage children, one daughter, nearly 18, and a son. And as a woman, and also more importantly, I'm a magistrate of 12 years. So when I found out that the perpetrator was a police officer, kind of rocked my world. So there was a sort of perfect trifecta of me kind of losing it, as it were. And I just was just horrified that things like this were still happening. And I don't know, I just felt compelled, like so many people, to find out why. And so I found myself on this sort of subliminal journey of, looking into safeguarding at that sort of frontline level, what was happening to the police, what had gone wrong, and who'd come along to fill that space. And in that time, it was the private security industry that I recognised that had come in to fill a lot of that frontline security safeguarding space. But the difficulty there is that the level of scrutiny within that sphere is a lot less than as you can imagine from a police officer. So I decided that I was going to do something about it. I wanted to make an immediate positive impact on safeguarding and keeping vulnerable people safe. So off I went, my madness, and I went and decided to go and get myself qualified as a frontline door supervisor. And I did that. And whilst I did that, we were in the year when we had a census, and that census said that 51% of the population looked like me. They were women. And so that all of a sudden I was just, my God, there's an industry sector of 500,000 people over the last 20 odd years regulated, but only 10% of those people were women. And I just thought, how can it be that, every time I go out, 90% of the time, the person standing on the door has absolutely no idea about me personally as a woman, but more importantly, the things that we have to go through, that we've been conditioned to go through all our lives. And I just thought, right, put a stop to that. I'm going to show them why we are part of the solution. And so off I went and got qualified, and I liked it. And I thought, I'm a bit of a night owl as well. So, anything that meant that I could be sort of standing on the doors of a club was quite a good thing. So I actually decided that it wasn't going to be enough for me to persuade women to come into this industry just by doing the course. I had to go and walk the walk and talk the talk. So I did for just under 2 years. So I worked the doors in Brighton whilst going to court, like often the next day. So I'd be sort of, dispensing one sort of justice on a club door, and then at 9 o'clock in the morning I'd be sitting on the bench. But why that was important to me, and that's the kind of person I am anyway, is that I needed to absolutely understand at a fundamental grassroots level what it meant to be a woman in that nighttime economy in particular, what the industry was lacking in terms of training and cultural awareness, because my big thing is that the people on those doors need to reflect the communities in which they serve. That is my mantra. And if we're not doing that, then we're not doing it right. And we have to change that. And so much has changed culturally. Just even if you're just thinking about from the Me Too movement, and George Floyd, just how radically different the world is. The way in which the private security industry in particular is managing that is somewhat out of date. The training modules and program was 20 odd years ago. Haven't changed it, slightly tweaked it. It's not good enough. And so I was determined to do something about that. So my whole the whole ethos of my work is about changing the narrative. I'm all about systemic change, and I mean that. I think people thought I was mad when I came into the industry. Oh God, what do you think she's going to do? But it was like, no, I won't accept anything less. 20 years or so of a race to the bottom is not going to keep my loved ones safe, and that's what we should be demanding, that of people in those roles. So it's about having a conversation with the industry about what they have massively got wrong, what needs to change, and how I can work with them to help them do that. And I think the industry has missed a voice, someone willing to put their hand up and go, you know what, no one else is doing this, I'm going to do it. And as I said to you before, we've talked about this before, it has to be the agenda, not an item on a list that gets lost over time. It needs to be the agenda. So that's everything that drives me, is about having this dialogue with the industry, with the policing community, with communities, because it's all about engagement, about how we can have work in a coordinated way to come up with proper sort of community-centric plans for tackling civic issues like, civil society issues like violence against women and girls and hate crimes, antisocial behaviour and extremism. We've seen what's happening. We've just had an election in the US. And what I keep telling people is that things that happen around the world globally have a direct consequence on what happens in this country. Far right extremism in Europe on our doorstep, issues in Israel and Gaza, the massive increase in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism immediately when that war started, massively playing itself out on the streets in our country. And we don't have a plan. We don't have an approach, a response to these things. And it's unacceptable, really. So this is what I'm all about.
Well, this is how our paths first crossed. So I met you through my work with British Transport Police, and you came to speak with us. And one of the things that where our messages certainly align is very much around what needs to change around people to increase safety and to think about who else do we then need to work with. And I was struck by the work that you're undertaking and delivering across security, in particular, thinking about who are those people that I know where you say second line of defence, but often they're the first. And it made me think around the spaces and places where children, young people, vulnerable people will be, and who do we need to work with so that we create that guardianship that you're describing. And I wanted to think from your perspective and the work that you've done so far, what are those risks and those harms that are impacting our children and our young adults that you observe?
Yeah, I think it's intersectionality in every sphere of life is an important thing. We can never look at things sort of one dimensionally. We always have to kind of look at the intersections. And with children, there's so much going on. So if we talk about a generation, so the Gen Zs, right? They're basically my offspring, right? We raise them to be socially aware and with feelings and have consciousness and and it's brilliant. They're expressing all of those things as well as a whole lot of other things, but they're expressing those things. It's brilliant. So that's wonderful. And we saw all of that around the sort of Me Too movement, and we saw that around the George Floyd, and social media plays a lot in that. But I think what we have to, as the older generations, that we have to recognise that they have been born out of a different time where technology, in particular social media, drives an awful lot of the way that they live their lives, express themselves, and can be exposed. So for me, there's urban culture, sort of, inner cities that you've got gang culture. That's one thing. And then you've got the issues that arise out of that you obviously know all about, which is county lines, right, and the exploitation of young people. But then we've got the response of young people to the issues around sort of privacy. So their attitude to privacy is a lot less robust than ours, right? So they will happily tell you where they are at any point in the day, and you'll be able to track them on their mobile phone in a way that we just would not. But out of that comes an acceptance of behaviour as well. So, for example, young people are much more likely to think it's okay to be tracked by their partner on their mobile phone. Unacceptable, right? But these are things. So the statistics, the research is out there. So you ask a young person of the age of between, I don't know, 14 and 20, whatever, and they won't think it's strange that, their partner wants to, find out where they are by putting something on their phone, which, raises all kinds of issues around their awareness around privacy and how that is going to affect them in later life. And then we've also got the fact that you kind of play your life out online with the rest of your sort of young adult community, and then of course what you're going to be is exploited and exposed to awful actors out there, mean actors who want to exploit your youth. So massive increase in sextortion, right? In particular, targeting young male men, right? So basically getting them into a compromising situation and then threatening them and saying, we're going to expose you at school or to all your friends. And people are committing suicide, right? These are absolutely things that are happening now, not just in this country, around the world, that we absolutely need to get a grip on. We need to make sure that those entities that are, running these platforms are held to account. So obviously we have the Online Safety Act that's coming out, but it's all well and good having an act, but are we going to enforce, what are we going to do? Are we going to hold these people to account? Because we're going to, we're losing our young people. Young people are kind of getting it from all angles. So the way in which they engage is online. Are they being protected properly around in those spaces? I don't think so. What should we be doing? What should we be doing more in schools and colleges to educate them about the need to respect privacy, their own, and the ongoing effect for them in later life if they don't do that? And there are ways in which, I think the police and private security need to work more closely together to ensure that we come up with, policies and procedures and practices to help them do that. And again, I think everything comes back to community engagement for me. There's no point in having this campaign, if you haven't actually gone into the schools, if you haven't actually leaned in to those spaces or spoken to the parents who are experiences the fallout of some of these things that happen. We need to lean into communities. We need to listen, right? Ask the right questions and listen. And then out of that, we form policies and we come up with practices and procedures as opposed to the other way around. So my argument is that too much of our safeguarding is imposing the way that people should be living their lives as opposed to listening to how their lives are being affected by certain things that are going on there. So it's about turning it on its head. It's not rocket science, I don't think, but getting people to do that is another question.
It's as I'm hearing you talk, that is a significant cultural shift, certainly in social care as well. And when you're making me quite often what we do with best intentions in order to safeguard, like for example, if a parent might be tracking a child's phone, and I've definitely had young people say to me, I don't like to travel by myself, especially at night if I'm worried. So my parent will track my phone. And what you're describing is that becomes normalized,
exactly,
and that can be exploited.
You've got it in right. So what are you saying to your children? If you're not, I'm all about trust, and you break that trust with me, you're in trouble. So with my children, it's like, here is a bit of rope, off you go. You need to go up and learn. You make mistakes, fine, we'll learn by them. But these are your parameters. I'm not going to track you. I'm not going to check up on you. Because again, what does that say about future behaviour when somebody starts doing that to you? You're going to think it's okay. We have to change the way that we communicate with our young people. I think we need to communicate with them more. I keep saying, with mums and dads always say to me, what kind of advice can you give me about my 18-year-old? It's like, talk to them, right? Just talk. I've been talking to my children since the age of 5 in that way. I haven't stopped talking to them. You need to have a line of communication with your children, not telling them what to do because, they'll shut down. But it's like, you're going to be moving into this sphere. Here are some of the things that you need to think about. When you go out as a group, stay together, just give them some pointers, and don't sort of come down on them if and when they get it wrong, but just help put them back on the right path. But it is, for me, it's about open dialogue and constantly talking to young people and asking them.
There's something there, I think, as well, for people to show their workings out. Well, if we're asking or we're doing something, there needs to be a clear, well, the starting point from your perspective is we need to have a discussion about what we might need to do and why we're doing what we're doing. But then if we are taking decisions, we need to be clear about why those decisions have been taken, and also conscious of what the negative impacts might be through our endeavours to create safety or increase safety. You mentioned something else there, which I don't think is often talked about, and that is the sextortion and sexual abuse of boys. And that's something certainly that I've observed in my work. And you mentioned earlier about the intersectionality of a lot of these things and how people are able to hold power over others because of a fear of how that person will be perceived.
If you think about young boys as well, in terms of their maturity, I think there's a particular reason why those organised sort of criminal gangs are going for them. And it's because if you think about their sort of emotional maturity, especially around that sort of age of 13, 14, 15, compared to that of a girl, you know, they're much more fatalistic, right? You imagine you've got a 14-year-old child and they think that it's better that they take their life when the mum and dad are sleeping in the room next door because someone's got a picture of them naked, right? And so it's about what more do we need to do, particularly with young boys, about educating and speaking to them and hearing the issues that they're going through to ensure that they're never put in that situation, or that they recognise that this is what might be happening to them and that they'll go and seek help. You know, we're not doing enough. And we're not talking about these things. I mean, sextortion is an issue. It's a massive issue. But no one is talking about it. I don't know why. I don't know why. And it worries me.
It's really worrying. I think, and it makes me think around how everybody needs to be talking about it so that they're able to then think about how they're going to respond, how they're going to identify, how they're going to recognise, how they're going to support children, both parents, carers, your industry, the industry that I'm involved in. I was thinking, I suppose one of the things that I wanted to ask you about in your work is a lot of the discussions that we've had, we've talked about the difference that gender makes, the difference that race makes, the difference that sexual orientation makes. In your work, what do you feel or what do you observe is required in addition to what's already provided for other groups?
I think the big thing for me that is missing around safeguarding, particularly within policing and private security at a frontline level, is that connectivity piece with the community. And I think often there is a generational gap. So an awful lot of the sort of old-time door supervisors have been doing that kind of work for sort of 20, 30 years. They're of a completely different mindset and generation. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a handful of them that really should not be doing the job at all. They should not be in the industry. We need to get rid of them, full stop. But I believe that the majority of them that are there, finding themselves in this role now, are lacking, not because they're horrible people, but just because they haven't been given the relevant training. I've had many older men who've seen me come up and do the work that I'm doing. I'm working alongside them, and they just come up to me afterwards and say, I don't understand how you do that. You can speak to anyone. I've watched you talk to this person and that person. You're talking about, you know, the weather over here and holidays over there and handbags and shoes. And I'm just, you know, and I know it sounds bad. It's just I'm being me. And obviously, you know, I'm a good communicator and I like people. So it makes it easier for me. It's like, it's my happy place, right? I love talking to people. And so some people feel more uncomfortable, but it's about leaning in. It's about telling them that actually your job first and foremost isn't about stopping that person from coming in. It's about making sure that once that person comes in, they are safe. And so you need to do everything in your power. And you're only going to be able to do that by talking to them. So have a conversation. And I said, I'm just having a conversation because this is the point at which we are making contact with those people so that if anything happens inside the venue, they're not going to be afraid to come and talk to you. And what distresses me is the level of young people, women in particular, that get assaulted in venues and are too afraid to come and have a conversation because the person on the door has not made them feel at all
Mm.
comfortable. That's unacceptable. And that's training.
Mm.
That's about cultural awareness. That's about talking to door supervisors and making them understand. And it's not about what you believe in, because this is what I have to tell door supervisors all the time. I don't care about your beliefs, right? What I care about is that regardless of gender, ethnicity, whatever, that you are doing your job and making sure that person feels welcome and safe, right? So that they'll come to you. Keep your opinions to yourself, right? There's a time and a place for that. It's probably in your own house, and it's about getting that across to people. We're not saying don't have an opinion, but you don't have that opinion when you're doing that job. And I
Mm.
think this is where the industry is finding that kind of level of, cultural awareness training quite difficult.
I think hearing you speak, there's so many parallels between the industries that I've
Yeah, that's
worked
so
in,
fair.
and I train social workers, police officers, various other professionals across the country, and you're making me think actually before we start training anybody in anything, and if we're really focused on relationships, that first contact is the relationship with the organisation. It's not necessarily the long-term in-depth piece of work that you might do. It's how do you very quickly support someone to build trust in an organization or in a setting where if they were in need, they would trust you enough
Yes.
to seek support.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? Well, how do we support people to be able to communicate with people in a way that they can match to people?
It's about exposure, don't you think, as well? It's about, how much easier will it be to communicate with the LGBTQ plus community if you have spent time in and amongst people living, breathing in that community? It's just not that difficult. And obviously, it's not, it might not be your natural place, but
Mm.
we need to be doing more to bring these communities together. So it's not like, it should just be a normal part of the world that you live in. We live in Brighton, and everyone talks about, just how wonderfully diverse and whatever. And yes, it is to an extent. But what also makes me sad is that I remember working at Chalk, in those years, the couple of years that I was doing work on the doors. And what really upset me is learning that members of the LGBTQ plus community were having to be escorted from their place in Kemp Town where they would meet. They'd meet at this amazing place called Arcobaleno in Kemp Town, but they were meeting there because of the abuse that they would get when they were going to Polyglamorous, the queer night, once a month. And I just thought, whoa, 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 what's going on? So on the one hand, you're telling me that, this is the most, it's just rubbish.
Mm.
It's absolute rubbish. And we're not talking about these things. And so that was a real eye opener for me that everything is not what it seems. And because people they're not talking.
I
They're not
remember
talking.
being surprised when I moved to Brighton maybe 11, 12 years ago. And I remember being surprised, some of my friends telling me that they'd been assaulted. And I was thinking, what, in Brighton? They said, well, if you, if you don't, if you had an issue with somebody, you're, the people that are vulnerable that you might assault are in Brighton,
Yeah.
potentially. And I thought, it hadn't occurred to me.
Yeah.
It hadn't occurred to me because we do talk a lot about it being a safe city. We do talk a lot about Brighton being a city of sanctuary,
Yeah.
and yet within that, we do have different groups that have different opinions,
Yeah.
different values, and I think what you're making me think of is I have to think of my social work training now, but I'm sure it was Thompson that talked about the values that you may hold and the values of your profession, and they won't always align.
Yeah.
And you need to be very, very conscious
Yes.
of both
Yeah.
in order to be able to work with difference.
Yeah, very much so. And it's as you say, it's that cultural shift. And interesting, the event that I ran 2 weeks ago, safeguarding in our city for Brighton. This idea about building resilient community. Um, it's about the difficulties you said, difficulties like I wanted that conversation to be as broad as I possibly could make it, and that's why it took a long time and was hard work, because I just didn't want a section of the community. It had to be everyone, because I believe that, we talk about a whole of society approach
Mhm.
to safeguarding. It's everybody's problem. You can't just say it's down to the parents, or, oh, the schools need to be doing one. What about the police? Nonsense. If anyone, you are absolutely naive if you think that you're going to get a solution to, stopping in the main men harming women through domestic violence and assaulting them. You think that the police are going to be able to solve that, you're madly mistaken, right? So it's about getting those safeguarding entities in a room, sat around the table, to come up with the one plan,
Mhm.
right? That involves the conversation with the entire community, and it's about getting that sort of cultural shift, mindset shift, to kind of go, stop doing the little tick box exercise and showing your boss that you did that little thing on diversity, because that doesn't mean anything. We're on this treadmill, and we're not. I'm all about moving forward. Nothing frustrates me more. That's the problem with me. I have to rein myself in, because I'm like 10 years down the line, and everyone's like, at least you've got to come back. They're still playing catch up. But it's, you know what I mean? It's like, come on, constantly. Everything I do is like, how is that going to get us to that bit? How is that going to help these people get on this bus and come with us to that point? What are the practical things that we need to do? How are we going to prioritize these things? Everyone is going to come to the table with their slightly different perspective, and that's what's good, right?
Mm.
It's about all those differences coming together, but it's about coming up with one plan. And this is what I keep hammering hold of. I don't want 75 different, approaches to violence against women and girls. Thank you very much, because it ain't gonna get done. We're not going to achieve anything.
What I liked so much about that conference is that there was difference,
Yeah.
and there were people with very different views, but they're all sat together. And what came from that was actually this, regardless of the difference that's held, we still need to pull forward in a direction. And what you're describing strategically is what I talk about operationally all the time. Anyone that's ever worked with me, anyone that's ever come to anything that I've delivered, it's very much around how do we get each person around that child or family pulling in the same direction.
Correct.
Because what you will find sometimes is that this agency has their plan, this agency has their plan,
Yeah.
and also that can sometimes section off different needs. So it can be that if this person has an emotional or mental health need, well, you need to talk to that person. Or if you need to speak to someone about attendance, you need to talk to that person. And trying to bring that together and say, have we really understood what's driving the risk or the harm or what we're concerned about? Have we then sat down and really worked to think about what it is that needs to be different, or how that person's needs are being met? What I observe certainly in my work is that that's needed at every single level. And I think that when I hear you talk about those plans, at every single level we can get it not right.
Yeah. And it's because I think that the A word, it's accountability, right? Often what happens is that we say, we need to go off and do something around that. But, and it may or may not happen, but no one's pulled up about that. No one's kind of, so that thing that you did 6 months ago. So how did you follow up on that? And what was the outcome? And what do we need to do next? There's no sort of coordinated response to these things. And I think the minute we start asking people to put their hands up, right, I'm going to have a seat at the table and I'm going to contribute to this for this reason. And then we're going to say, and on top of that, this is not a talking shop. This is about prioritizing stuff that's important and apportioning workload to people, and then coming back and reporting, what have we done? What are the quick wins? What can we work on in the longer term? And what are we aiming for? Right.
This is, it's certainly in my experience of running a successful board, what we need is people that come with their professional expertise that then take away the action within their agency.
Correct.
Not that they just represent
Correct.
the voice of that agency.
Absolutely.
That's
agree with you.
absolutely integral to, in my experience, the success of any multi-agency partnership work.